The last thing Oren expected to do before he died was ask humans for help. He was a fleet scribe by training, a recorder of history, not a soldier. His hands were built for stylus pads, not weapons. But weapons had not saved Ven-Or. Weapons had not stopped the Draknari warships hanging in orbit like iron moons, pouring fire onto the colony fields where his people had farmed for 3 generations. So Oren did the only thing left. He went to the deep-range transmitter room, stepped over 2 bodies he did not look at directly, and turned on every broadcast channel available to him. He typed the SOS in 12 languages. He included coordinates, population count, casualty figures, and the name of the attacking fleet. Then, almost as an afterthought, he scrolled to the bottom of the frequency list and found the Terran emergency band, a channel added to galactic communication systems 40 years ago as a diplomatic formality. Most species never used it. Most species forgot it existed. Oren activated it anyway. He sent the signal and sat back on the floor of the transmitter room and waited to die. He did not die that hour. Far away in a monitoring station on the edge of human-controlled space, a signals officer named Dav was eating a cold meal and staring at a screen full of quiet. His shift was the kind that passed without event: routine scans, routine silence, routine nothing. Then a light blinked on his console that he had never seen blink before. He leaned forward. He read the incoming data once. He read it again. Then he stood up so fast his chair rolled into the wall behind him, and he was already calling his superior before he reached the door. Within 4 minutes, the signal was at the desk of Admiral Rael Durson. Durson was not a loud man. He did not pace or shout. He had the kind of stillness that comes from spending 30 years making decisions that killed people, either his enemies or his own soldiers, when he got it wrong. He read Oren's message slowly. He looked at the coordinates. He looked at the population figure, 2.3 million Thyrani civilians. He looked at the name of the attacking fleet, Draknari Dominion, 3rd Expansion Armada, High Warlord Grath commanding. He set the message down. He picked up the direct line to the UED War Council. The council convened in 8 minutes, which was fast for a body that normally took hours to agree on a lunch order. Durson did not give a speech. He did not appeal to their sense of justice or their political interests. He put Oren's message on the main screen, let them read it, and then said 4 words. "Authorize me right now." There was a pause. Minister Surin, the youngest voice on the council, spoke first. She said, "We don't have a treaty obligation to the Thyrani." Durson said, "They asked, we answer, that's the obligation." Another pause, longer. Then the vote appeared on the council screen, and every military terminal in the UED network, from Earth to Mars to the shipyards above Titan, received a single word at the same moment. Mobilize. What happened next was not chaos. That was the part that outsiders never understood about humanity's military. It did not scramble. It did not rush. It simply began to move the way a glacier moves, slow to start, impossible to stop, and catastrophic to anything in its path. Crew manifests were pulled. Fuel lines were connected. Weapon systems that had been cold for years came online in sequence, deck by deck, ship by ship, without fanfare and without error. Dav, still standing in his monitoring station, watched the fleet movement data begin populating his screen. He had worked signals for 11 years. He had never seen numbers like that. He counted the departing vessels until he lost count. On Ven-Or, Oren sat in the dark of the transmitter room and did not know any of this. He only knew that the fire outside had not stopped. He could hear it through the walls, the deep, rhythmic percussion of Draknari bombardment, methodical and patient, the way you sound when you are not afraid of anyone fighting back. He opened his scribe log and began to write, because that was what he did. He recorded what he saw and what he heard and what he felt, and at the end of the entry he wrote one line that surprised even him. He wrote, "The humans received our signal. I do not know if they will come, but I found in the act of sending it something I had not felt in 3 days. I found that I was not ready to stop hopping." He closed the log. Outside, the bombardment continued. In the dark between stars, something began to move toward him. The Galactic Council received the UED diplomatic notice at the same time they were debating which subcommittee should draft the letter of concern regarding the Ven-Or situation. The notice was short. It did not use formal greeting language. It did not include the customary 14-point diplomatic header that all species were expected to use when communicating with the Council. It said, in plain galactic common, Terran emergency response has been activated for the Ven-Or system. All non-Terran vessels are advised to clear Sector 7 Delta within 14 hours. This is a courtesy notice, not a request. UED Naval Command. Ambassador Feln of the Sorathi Collective read it aloud to the chamber. Then he set it down and looked around the room. Laughter came first from the Brelkin delegation. Then it spread, the way laughter does when people are nervous and need somewhere to put it. Even the more restrained ambassadors allowed themselves quiet smiles. One delegate, a tall, gray-skinned Vethori named Counselor Adris, said, with genuine amusement, "They sent a courtesy notice. How very human." He said the last 2 words the way you say something endearing about a small animal that thinks it is dangerous. Nobody on the Galactic Council had ever seen a human warship outside of Earth's orbit. The common understanding, repeated so often it had become fact, was that human military capacity was largely ceremonial. They were aggressive by nature, yes, emotional, unpredictable, but their technology lagged behind the major powers by at least 2 generations. Everyone knew this. It was settled knowledge. The Council returned to debating the subcommittee. High Warlord Grath received the same notice aboard his flagship, the Undying Verdict, which was currently sitting in comfortable high orbit above Ven-Or's largest continent. He was in the middle of a meal when his communications officer brought the message. He read it. He handed it back. He told his officer to file it and return to his meal without another word. His tactical advisor, a cautious Draknari named Sorvak, lingered. He said, "My warlord, should we increase sensor range as a precaution?" Grath looked at him. Sorvak did not finish the sentence. On the surface of Ven-Or, Elder Kova learned about the Terran notice from Oran, who had intercepted it through the transmitter room's passive receivers. She read it twice. She was old enough to have negotiated with 7 different species, and wise enough to know that confidence and capability were different things. She did not know which one the humans possessed. She only knew that no other species had responded to the SOS at all. She told Oran to keep monitoring. He did. What he found, 12 hours after the notice was sent, was a Draknari long-range scout report, a routine sensor sweep filed by a patrol ship at the edge of the system. The patrol had detected anomalous mass readings at the boundary of Sector 7 Delta. The readings were large. The patrol had attempted to classify the contacts using the standard Draknari threat database, which contained profiles for every known military vessel in the galaxy. The database had returned no matches. The patrol noted the contacts were moving. It noted they were moving in formation, not the loose, practical formation of a merchant convoy, but the tight, geometric formation of a military fleet. It noted the contact count had increased between the first scan and the second scan, taken only 6 minutes apart, and requested clarification from Fleet Command on how to proceed. Sorvak received that report. He read it 3 times, then he went back to Grath. Grath was still not concerned. He told Sorvak that sensor equipment malfunctioned near gravity gradients, and that the patrol officer was probably reading background radiation. He told Sorvak that no species in the galaxy would send military assets this deep into Draknari expansion space over one colony of Thyrani farmers. He told Sorvak that the humans, specifically, had no assets capable of threatening a fleet of this size. Sorvak said, "Of course, my warlord." He returned to his station. He pulled up the patrol report again and looked at the contact count. On the first scan, 6 hours ago, the patrol had recorded 41 unidentified contacts. On the second scan, 30 minutes later, the number was 119. The third scan had just come in. Sorvek sat very still for a moment. Then he opened a private channel to the patrol officer and asked for a manual recount. The patrol officer confirmed the number. Sorvek asked him to confirm it again. The officer did. Sorvek looked at the number for a long time. 308 contacts, arranged in 7 distinct formation groups, moving at a speed that suggested they had been in fold transit until very recently and had dropped to sublight inside the system's outer boundary, not at the edge, where ships normally exited fold space, but deep inside it. Which meant they had folded closer than any ship was supposed to be able to fold. Which meant they had known exactly where they were going. Sorvek put the report in his pocket and said nothing, not because he was loyal to Grath's confidence, but because he had just looked at the numbers and realized that whatever was about to happen, there was nothing on this side of the system that could stop it, and saying so out loud would only cause a panic that served no one. He began, very quietly, to calculate the distance to the fold limit boundary. In the transmitter room below, Oren was still writing. The Draknari fleet did not see the vanguard arrive. They heard it. Not sound, there is no sound in space. What they heard was the electromagnetic pulse that 40 human warships produce when they collapse their fold drives simultaneously inside a gravity well. Every Draknari sensor panel in the system screamed at once. Displays flickered. Navigation arrays reset. 3 Draknari vessels near the outer belt lost engine synchronization for 11 seconds and drifted before their crews corrected. Then the sensors came back online and showed what was there. 40 ships, sitting in perfect formation at the edge of Ven Or's upper orbital band, exactly where no ship should have been able to fold in. The Draknari targeting computers immediately began trying to classify them. Hull geometry, no match. Drive signature, no match. Weapon array configuration, no match. Size classification returned an error because the humans had apparently decided that standard galactic size categories were not adequate and their vessels required new ones. Aboard the lead human ship, Captain Dissau Ward was looking at the Draknari fleet the way a surgeon looks at a problem, not with anger and not with fear, but with attention. She had served 22 years in the UED Navy. She had never fired on a living enemy before today. She found that this did not bother her in the way she had once expected it might. She opened a channel on all Draknari frequencies, with simultaneous translation running in 7 languages, and she spoke. "This is Captain Dissau Ward, United Earth Directorate Naval Command. You have conducted an unprovoked bombardment of a civilian colony. You will cease fire immediately, withdraw all vessels from Ven Or orbit, and surrender High Warlord Grath to UED custody for tribunal proceedings. You have 60 seconds to comply." The channel stayed open. She watched the timer on her display. Grath's response came at the 40-second mark. He did not accept. He did not negotiate. He simply ordered his fleet to engage. 112 Draknari warships rotated toward the human vanguard and opened fire. The first volley hit the lead human ship, Ward's own vessel, INS Ironwall, across its forward hull. The Draknari weapons were high-caliber plasma repeaters, capable of cracking the hull of any vessel in the Draknari inventory in 2 or 3 sustained strikes. They hit the Ironwall and the Ironwall did not crack. It did not buckle. Its hull produced a visible shimmer, a layered ablative magnetic dispersal system that took the plasma energy and spread it across the entire surface area of the ship, bleeding it off as thermal radiation. The Ironwall shuddered slightly. Its damage report showed elevated surface temperature, nothing else. Ward's weapons officer looked at her. She looked at the timer. 2 seconds remained. She said, "Fire." What the Draknari fleet experienced in the next 4 seconds changed the way every species in the galaxy would think about human engineering for the next century. Human weapons did not operate on plasma principles. They did not use the directed energy systems common to galactic military technology. They used a rail-accelerated kinetic system paired with a shape-charge electromagnetic warhead, a combination that, against hulls designed to resist plasma and energy weapons, was like hitting glass with a hammer. 11 Draknari warships ceased to exist between Ward's order and the moment she drew her next breath. Not disabled, not damaged, gone. The Draknari fleet did something then that it had never done in 40 years of expansion warfare. It hesitated. A full 3 seconds passed in which no orders were issued and no weapons were fired, because the tactical officers aboard every Draknari vessel were looking at their screens and trying to understand what they were seeing. Their threat assessment models had no category for this. Their battle protocols had no response for losing 11 ships in 4 seconds to a fleet 1/3 their size. Grath recovered first. He was angry, which made him dangerous, and he threw every ship at the vanguard in a full-pressure engagement, surrounding, overwhelming, burying the 40 human vessels in numbers. Ward did not retreat. She advanced. The vanguard drove into the center of the Draknari formation, splitting it in two. Human ships did not fight from distance the way Draknari doctrine preferred. They came close, dangerously close. They used their hull dispersion systems to survive strikes that would have killed other ships, and they returned fire at ranges where missing was nearly impossible. A Draknari captain named Brev, commanding the cruiser Stormwall, tried to make a firing run on the Iron Wall's flank. His ship struck the Iron Wall 3 times at close range. Then a human vessel the size of a heavy frigate came alongside him at matching speed, close enough that Brev could see the hull markings, and hit his engine section with a single shot that shut down his entire ship. Not an explosion, just off, like a switch. Brev did not understand how that was possible. He would spend 4 years in a UED detention facility thinking about it. The battle lasted 19 minutes before the Draknari formation began to break. They had lost 31 warships and had not destroyed a single human vessel. They had damaged several, but damage and destruction were proving to be very different things when the target was built by people who had specifically designed it to keep taking hits. Grath called for a defensive reformation, pulling his remaining ships into a tighter cluster around his flagship. His sensor officer informed him, quietly, that there were new contacts appearing at the system's fold boundary. Not 40 this time. Grath looked at the number on the screen for a moment. Then he asked for it to be confirmed. It was confirmed. He asked again. It was confirmed again. 604 contacts, arriving in formation. Grath sat down slowly in his command chair, and for the first time in a very long career, he had absolutely nothing to say. In the Galactic Council chamber, the laughter had stopped approximately 14 minutes ago. They were watching a live sensor feed pulled from a Sorathi observation buoy that happened to be in the outer system. It was not a military feed. It was not high resolution, but it was clear enough to show the fold pulses appearing at the boundary of the Ven-Or system, one after another, each one a ship dropping from faster-than-light travel into real space, each one taking a position in a formation so precise that the Council's own analysts had started murmuring about it. Ambassador Feln had stopped speaking mid-sentence when the count passed 200. Councillor Adris, the same Vethori who had smiled about the courtesy notice, was now sitting very still with his hands flat on the table in front of him, watching the screen with an expression that had no humor left in it at all. The Brelkin delegate who had laughed first had left the chamber. Nobody asked where he went. The feed showed carrier platforms now, 14 of them, each one large enough to hold dozens of smaller vessels in its internal bays, sitting at the back of the formation like patient mountains. And behind the carriers, 3 objects that the observation buoy's automated classification system labeled simply as unknown structure class, because they were not ships in any standard sense. They were mobile station platforms, armored and weapon-mounted, the kind of installation that a species builds when it wants a forward military base it can move. The humans had brought their bases with them. Admiral Rael Durson had not made a speech to his fleet before they entered the system. He had sent a single message, 3 sentences long. It said, "There are 2.3 million civilians on that planet. They sent one signal. We are the answer to it." That was all. His fleet did not need motivation. It needed coordinates, which it already had, and clearance to act, which the Council had already given, and an enemy to face, which Grath had helpfully provided. Durson opened a fleet-wide channel when the last ship confirmed its position. "All units confirm formation. Vanguard, report status." Ward's voice came back from the iron wall. "Vanguard is engaged. We have degraded the enemy forward line by 60%. They have pulled into a defensive cluster around the flagship, awaiting your lead." Durson looked at his tactical map. He had spent 16 hours in fold transit studying the Draknari fleet's known doctrine. He knew how they clustered. He knew what they would do next, because species that had never been seriously challenged fight the way they were trained to fight by the book, because the book had always worked before. He opened a channel to the Draknari fleet. He did not introduce himself. He did not list his rank or credentials. He said, "You are surrounded. Your forward line is gone. Your warlord's flagship is currently being bracketed by 12 of my vessels. I am not going to ask you to surrender. I am going to tell you what is happening next. Your fleet is going to stand down. Your warlord is going to be transferred to my custody. Your remaining vessels are going to hold position until a Galactic Council retrieval team arrives to escort them out of this system. If any of your ships fires a weapon from this moment forward, I will remove it from the field. That is not a threat. That is a description of what will occur." He closed the channel. His communications officer, a young man named Foss who had never seen combat before this assignment, looked at the Admiral and said very quietly, "Do you think they'll comply?" Durson said no. He was right. Grath ordered a breakout attempt, a full-speed push through the human fleet's left flank with every surviving ship, trying to reach the fold limit boundary and escape. It was the logical choice. It was what Draknari doctrine called the bleeding spear: sacrifice the slow ships, protect the fast ones, run. It did not account for the fact that Durson had positioned his fleet assuming they would try exactly that. The left flank was not a gap. It was a funnel. The Draknari ships accelerating into it found themselves channeled into a narrowing corridor of human vessels on both sides, and the human ships did something then that none of the Draknari had known was possible. They performed short-range fold jumps inside the system, repositioning in the middle of the engagement, appearing at new coordinates within seconds, and cutting off the escape route before the Draknari fleet reached it. Short-range fold jumping was considered impossible by every major species in the galaxy. The mathematics of fold space said you could not open a stable fold point inside a gravity well this deep. The mathematics were correct. The humans had simply found a way to do it anyway, by using the gravity well itself as part of the fold anchor. They had figured this out 19 years ago and told no one. The Draknari breakout collapsed. What followed was not a battle. It was a result. Draknari ships that fought were destroyed. Draknari ships that ran were cut off. The ones that stopped moving were held in position by human vessels that matched their course and kept weapons trained on them with a patience that felt, to the Draknari crews watching through their hull cameras, less like military strategy and more like certainty. Oran was watching from below. He had found a working exterior camera feed and was staring at the battle through a screen not much larger than his hand. He watched the human ships move. He watched the Draknari formation dissolve. He wrote in his log, "They are not angry. I thought they would be angry. They are simply working." the same way you dismantle a structure methodically, without emotion, because the structure needs to come down and the emotion is not useful. He paused. He wrote, "I think that is the most frightening thing I have ever seen." High Warlord Grath made one final decision that he believed was clever. When the breakout failed and his fleet stopped moving, when the Draknari ships around him were sitting silent and surrounded by human vessels in every direction, Grath reached for the one piece of leverage he believed he still had. He opened a direct channel to Admiral Durson and he said, "I have orbital bombardment systems still active above your colony. If you do not allow my fleet safe passage out of this system, I will resume the attack on the surface. My weapons will reach the ground before yours reach mine. Think carefully." There was a pause on the channel. Grath assumed the pause was Durson thinking. It was not. Durson had already heard the threat before it was spoken. His intelligence team had flagged Grath's weapons activation 3 minutes before the call, and by the time Grath finished his sentence, the response had already been issued to a specialized squadron of human vessels that had been sitting quietly at the edge of the formation doing what appeared to be nothing. They had not been doing nothing, they had been calculating. The squadron fired, not at the Draknari flagship, not at the surrounding fleet, but at specific coordinates above Ven Or's surface. 17 precise shots targeting the Draknari ground bombardment installations that had been firing on the colony for 3 days. Each shot traveled through a gap in the Draknari fleet formation without touching a single enemy ship. Each shot hit its target with an accuracy that Grath's own weapons officer later described in a deposition as not possible by any standard I was trained on. The bombardment systems went dark in 90 seconds, every one of them. Not a single civilian structure on the surface below was touched. Grath stared at his weapons display. Then he looked at the surface scan. Then he looked at the display again. Durson's voice came over the channel, calm and unhurried. "You were saying." Grath said nothing. Durson said, "I'm going to send a boarding team to your ship now. You are going to instruct your crew to stand down. If anyone on your vessel raises a weapon, I will treat it as a continuation of hostilities and respond accordingly. Your crew's survival from this point forward is entirely in your hands." Ward took the boarding team herself. 12 soldiers in full combat pressure suits, cutting through the Undying Verdict's secondary airlock with a breaching tool that went through Draknari hull plating the way. A hot knife goes through soft wax. The team moved through the ship in a pattern that suggested they had studied its schematics in advance, which they had, because the UED had been quietly cataloging Draknari vessel blueprints for 11 years through various intelligence channels. The Draknari crew did not fight. There were 340 of them aboard. Most were engineers and navigators and weapons operators, not soldiers, and they had just watched their entire fleet get dismantled by 40 ships less than an hour ago. When Ward's team came through the corridor toward the command deck, the crew stepped aside. Grath was at the center of his command deck when Ward entered. He was a large being, taller than most humans, broad, with the natural plating across his shoulders that Draknari grew as a mark of age and rank. He looked at Ward the way powerful beings look at someone they are recalculating. He had not expected them to be so ordinary-looking. He had imagined something more dramatic from a species capable of this much destruction. Ward handed him a data slate with a brief summary of the tribunal procedures. She told him he would be held aboard a UED vessel until a Galactic Council facility was designated for the proceedings. She told him his crew would be held in the ship's secure bays and given food, water, and medical attention as needed. She said all of this in a flat, professional tone, the way you talk to someone who used to be a problem and is now simply a task to be managed. Grath asked, because he could not stop himself, "How long have you been planning this?" Ward looked at him. She said, "Planning what?" "This," he said. "All of it, the fleet, the weapons, the fold jumping, the surface strike accuracy, how long?" Ward thought about it for a moment. not because she was unsure, but because she was deciding how much to say. Then she said, "We've been building that fleet for 38 years. The fold jump system took 19 years to develop. The targeting software for the surface strikes was perfected about 6 years ago." She paused. "You should know that we never wanted to use any of it." Grath looked at her. "Then why build it?" Ward said, "Same reason you lock your door at night even if you live in a safe neighborhood, because the neighborhood wasn't always safe." She took the data slate back from his unresponsive hands. "Come on. The Admiral wants to close this out before the Council starts sending messages." On the surface, Kova walked outside for the first time in 3 days. The sky was quiet. The fire was gone. Above her, through the pale atmosphere of Ven Or, she could see small lights moving, not the terrible orange glow of bombardment, but the white and blue running lights of ships. Human ships orbiting her world. She stood there for a long time, just breathing the air. Then Oren came and stood beside her and showed her the screen of his scribe pad. He had been writing without stopping. The document was already long. She asked him what he was writing. He said, "Everything, someone has to." She nodded and looked up at the lights again and did not say anything else. Durson appeared before the Galactic Council 3 days after the battle ended, by hologram, from the flag deck of his ship still sitting in Ven Or orbit. He did not apologize for the short notice. He did not use the formal greeting sequence or acknowledge the Council's procedural authority. He simply appeared on their projector and waited for the room to go quiet, which it did quickly, because the Council had seen the battle footage by now and quiet came easily to them when Durson was on screen. He presented the battle record first. Duration, casualties, vessel losses, Draknari losses, 143 warships destroyed, 62 disabled and under UED holding. UED losses, 0 ships destroyed. 11 vessels with significant hull damage, all still operational. He read the numbers without inflection, the way an accountant reads a ledger. Then he presented the surface casualty summary. Thirani dead from 3 days of Draknari bombardment, over 40,000. Injured, twice that. Infrastructure damage to the colony's agricultural network would affect food production for 2 seasons. Human medical teams and engineering units were already on the surface. They had been landing within 4 hours of the battle's end. Councillor Idris, the Vethori who had smiled at the courtesy notice, asked the question that the whole chamber wanted to ask, but nobody wanted to be the one to say. He said, "Admiral, the scale of your response, the fleet you brought, it exceeds anything we believed your species capable of. I think this council would like to understand what we are looking at exactly in terms of human military capacity." Durson looked at him for a moment. Then he shared a document to the council's main display. It was a UED fleet inventory, marked DECLASSIFIED at the top in large letters. It listed the first Armada, the one that had just fought above Ven Or, and its full complement. 640 ships, 14 carriers, 3 mobile station platforms. Below that a second listing, second Armada, larger. Below that a third, larger still. And a fourth. The chamber made no sound. One delegate began reading the numbers under his breath and stopped halfway through. Ambassador Feln stared at the screen long enough that his aide touched his arm to check if he was all right. Durson said, "I sent the smallest fleet. The signal did not indicate a need for the others. I prefer not to use more than the situation requires." He paused. "It is worth understanding that we have been building these fleets for nearly 4 decades, not to conquer, not to expand. 42 years ago, before we joined the galactic community, an event occurred that came close to ending humanity. You don't have full access to those records because we chose not to share them. What came out of that event was a doctrine. One doctrine applied consistently since then. We will not be caught unprepared again. Not ever." He looked around the room. "What you saw above Ven Or was not us showing you what we can do. It was us responding to a request for help. Those are different things. I would strongly encourage this council to keep that distinction in mind going forward." He ended the hologram without waiting for a response. Minister Surin, watching the feed from Earth, sat in her office for a long moment afterward with the room quiet around her. Then she wrote one line in her private log, not the official record, her personal one, that said simply, "He said exactly the right things and none of the wrong ones. That is harder than it looks." She closed the log and went back to work. In orbit above Ven Or, Durson met Kova face-to-face in a small conference room aboard his flagship. She was older than he had expected, and calmer. She sat across from him and looked at him with the careful attention of someone who had survived something and was still taking inventory of what remained. She said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer directly." He said, "All right." "Why did you come?" she said. "Not strategically, not politically. You are not obligated to us. We are not your allies. We are barely your neighbors. Your council could have sent a letter of concern and waited. Why did you come the way you came, as fast as you came, with everything you brought?" Durson thought about it. He did not give her the doctrine answer. He did not give her the political answer. He said, "Because 40,000 people died before we got here, and if I had moved slower it would have been more. The signal said you needed help. That was the whole reason. There was no other calculation." Kova looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once slowly and looked out the window at the planet below. Oran published his full account 2 weeks later. It was read by more species than any document in galactic history. Most of them read the battle sections first. But the part that got quoted most often, that got transmitted and reprinted and carved into public walls on 17 worlds, was the last paragraph. It said, "Do not think you understand what you saw above Ven Or. You saw power, yes, but power is common. What is not common is a species that builds the deadliest fleet in known space and then waits, patiently, quietly, for decades, for someone to ask for help before it uses it. Think carefully about what kind of people do that. And think even more carefully before you give them a reason to stop waiting." The UED Armada departed Ven Or system 7 days after the battle. No ceremony, no broadcast. The fleet simply collapsed into fold space in formation, 600 ships vanishing in a sequence of silent pulses that lasted less than 4 minutes. The sky above Ven Or went dark and quiet. Oren stood outside and watched the last fold pulse fade. He was already writing the next line before he went back inside.